Ever wondered whether there's a better way to develop stories before penning an entire draft and dropping thousands on an expensive developmental edit? Many, if not most, authors have at least a cursory familiarity with the four types of editing common in book development: developmental editing for the big picture, language editing for voice and style, copy editing for grammar and syntax, and proofreading to polish. Earlier this year, I set out on a quest to work with independent and hybrid publishers who I believe are doing good in the book world and truly have their published authors' best interests at heart, one of my must-haves when deciding who I want to work with. Often, independent and hybrid publishers, though, operate within slim margins and have little by way of budget to hire external help. However, independent and small publishers are also often open to new and innovative opportunities to help authors get the assistance they need within those slim margins. As part of my quest, I made it my mission to provide early and low-cost services to those publishers designed to help them maximize their editorial budgets by limiting or eliminating the need for expensive developmental edits later. How? Story development. This week, I'm sharing feedback I've delivered to authors through story development reviews, so you can analyze your novel through a story development lens before you finish your draft, so you have plenty of time to sow a new seed or two for the novel harvest. Now, without further ado, let's get beyond this awkward gardening analogy and talk story development. Gardeners who forget to sow seeds never get the satisfaction of watching those seedlings grow and bear fruit. I know, I said I was past the analogy, but gardeners garden. What can I say? Likewise, a novelist who forgets to sow story development points into their story will never get the satisfaction of holding a novel that truly feels as ripe and ready as a summertime peach. Once the first draft of your novel is written, you've already lost a big story development opportunity. Story development sits at the junction of book coaching and developmental editing. Most often, the author has a robust synopsis that details high-level plot and character arc points from beginning to end, revealing the twists and turns along the story path. Less often, the author has a partial draft and needs some serious heavy lifting to figure out what has gone wrong, why the story seems to have petered out, and how best to fill those gaps to finish the story. Story development begins with questions. Who is the protagonist? Where are they and when? What do they want and why? How do they plan to get the thing? What will hold them back from getting it? Now, below each of those high-level questions are lots of sub-questions, a list so long that the list itself could be turned into a video. But since the last thing you likely need is an overwhelming list of questions without answers, I'm going to instead share with you the 3 most common pieces of feedback I've shared during story development reviews. The most common piece of feedback given by far is structural in nature, and structural feedback affects the integrity of every single sentence within your manuscript. But structure isn't one thing, it's a mix of several foundations. Often when performing story development reviews, I encourage the author to start the story later, cutting early chapters and beginning closer to the main action. There are lots of reasons for this, but the biggest reason is reader interest. Readers are smart, and they often don't need a multi-chapter summary of the protagonist's life before their story truly starts. In fact, too much buildup before action can cause a story to drag, and if a story drags, readers are unlikely to stick with it. One exercise I think I've shared with every single author who's requested a story development review from me: paragraphing. While I previously talked about how important a paragraphing exercise is to the reader experience in Line Edit Like a Pro, you're welcome to check out that video after in the Writing Advice playlist, the message bears repeating. Every scene in a novel should read like a short story in itself, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Work through that paragraphing exercise until your meaning is as clear as you want it to be for your reader. Companion to starting the story a bit later and working through that paragraphing exercise is backstory overload. You may believe that you need to provide some backstory to your readers early to help them understand your protagonist and their circumstances. With limited exceptions, this assumption is incorrect. In the same way that you or I could meet a stranger tomorrow and make friends with them, your readers can meet your protagonist in the first paragraph and be ready to jump in the proverbial car and go for a ride. Nix the backstory and trust the reader to pick up clues along the way. The second most common piece of feedback given to authors relates to their character development and related character goals. Characters, through their thoughts, feelings, and actions, drive the story forward. And if there are character development problems, you may also end up with plot development issues, setting problems, chronology issues, and more. Remember, story is goal, motivation, and conflict. So make sure your protagonist has all three. Characters, especially your protagonist and antagonist, must have specific and compelling reasons, justifications for their actions. And readers learn of these reasons as they see your protagonist mull over their goals and motivations for achieving their goals. If your protagonist wants to be a heart surgeon, they must have a reason. If your protagonist desires only to leave society and become a hermit in the North Woods, they must have a reason. If your protagonist fails to pick up their child from school, they must have a reason. Make sure your protagonist wants one big thing that carries through the story. However, make sure they want something, even if it's just a glass of water, in every scene. If your protagonist begins the story as a sweet and innocent person who is selfless to their own detriment and ends the story as a sweet and innocent person who is selfless to their own detriment, your reader is unlikely to feel their benevolence. Instead, your reader might get bored. I've said it before, but it bears repeating. Characters are people too. People are flawed, curious, and passionate. We carry our biases, make assumptions, and learn new information constantly, which we use to refine our views and opinions. In short, we change over time. To allow your reader to bond with your character, allow them to witness how your character navigates their path, changing over time to become the hero at the end. While internal conflicts are related to character growth, they are specific enough that I'm calling them out here. Your characters must have strong internal obstacles and emotional stakes to drive forward the narrative. Internal conflict is also known as man versus self conflict, the internal war being waged within us all. Your character's thoughts, emotions, beliefs, or desires compete with their worldview or expectations and cause discomfort or discord in their lives. There's a reason I spent the month of March this year diving deep into each of the 5 literary points of view. Point of view in fiction isn't easy to wrangle. First person requires the intimacy of a stream of consciousness level of introspection. Second person turns your reader into a character. Third person leaves open lots of room for surprises. The objective provides a cinematic view. The omniscient is a godlike voice with an agenda of its own. Whatever flavor your point of view takes, writing it well is key. When using multiple points of view, each of the viewpoint characters must be treated as a protagonist or antagonist and must be as well developed as all other viewpoint characters. There also must be a specific reason to include each of their points of views. In telling the two-sided story, a video I made some time back, I talked about writing multiple POVs well, including distinctness of voice and balance of experience. So make sure you have a solid and defensible position for using more than one POV. And if you do move ahead with multiple POVs or even with multiple POV styles, ensure you strike a good balance in the way you handle changes and transitions between characters or styles. When performing a story development review for an author, I often ask them to consider at least one other point of view. A story told in the first person included a major lesson on the power of collectivism. Why not use the omniscient to show the collective in action? A story told using multiple POVs had lost a bit of narrative tension. Why not rewrite one of the POVs in the objective to keep some secrets from the reader? A story told in a dual POV style provided historical context through a prologue character. Why not give that character a voice of her own? Narrative voice is a big one, because it's the thing your reader spends the most time with over the course of your fiction work. So make sure the character providing the narrative voice is the right one to do so for your story, and that their voice is so well developed you'd know exactly who is speaking to you if they surprised you on the street. Story development before finishing your first draft can help you identify and fix structural issues, character development issues, and POV issues early on, saving you time and possibly money by removing the requirement for a developmental edit after your draft is written, because they are fundamental craft elements that emerging writers commonly struggle with across genres. If you've written a synopsis or have a partial draft in need of work, look at the structure, your characters, and your narrative perspective. Which opportunities for improvement do you see? Happy writing!